The fluorescent lights in courtroom 14 hummed above my head as my stepmother's attorney adjusted his cufflinks and smiled at me, the way you smile at something that doesn't matter. My stepmother sat at the plaintiff's table in a cream blazer, her pearl necklace catching the light, her posture perfect. She had always known how to perform for an audience. "Miss Caldwell," her attorney said, loud enough for the gallery to hear, "represents herself today. No legal counsel." He let that sit in the air a moment. A few people in the gallery murmured. My stepmother leaned toward her co-counsel and whispered something behind her hand. Both of them smiled. My father, seated just behind her in the first row of the gallery, caught my eye. He shook his head slowly, disappointed. He had that look down to a science, the same look he'd given me the morning he told me I was no longer welcome at Caldwell Group board meetings. The same look he'd worn the day my stepmother convinced him I had stolen proprietary data from the company my grandfather built. I was 31 years old. I was standing in a federal courthouse with a manila folder and the yellow legal pad, and every single person in that room believed I had already lost. I placed my hands flat on the defense table and looked straight ahead. They had absolutely no idea. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because it did not start in a courtroom. It started in a kitchen. I was 9 years old when my father married Deanna. She came into our house carrying a bottle of wine and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And within 18 months she had rearranged every room, replaced every piece of furniture my mother had chosen, and convinced my father that I was too sensitive and resistant to change. Those were her words. I heard her use them on a phone call once, her voice light and conversational, like she was describing a houseplant that wasn't thriving. My father believed her. He always believed her. That was the thing about Diana. She was extraordinarily good at being believed. I won't pretend my childhood was a horror story. It wasn't. My father loved me in the way that busy, distracted men love their children, from a distance, with good intentions and poor attention. He paid for my school, my clothes, my college. He showed up to my graduation. He told me once, standing in the parking lot of my university with his hands in his pockets, that he was proud of me. I held on to that for a long time. After graduation, I joined Caldwell Group. It was natural. My grandfather had founded it, my father ran it, and I had grown up understanding the business the way other kids understood their family's dinner table. I started in financial analysis. I was good at it. Within 3 years, I had restructured 2 underperforming divisions and identified a contract vendor that had been overbilling the company by roughly $340,000 annually for 6 years. My stepmother ran vendor relations. She did not appreciate my findings. I reported it internally the way I was supposed to. I documented everything, submitted it to the compliance officer, copied the CFO. 2 weeks later, I was called into my father's office. Diana was already there, seated in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap. My father looked at me with that look, the disappointed one, and told me that upon review, the compliance team had found irregularities in my own access logs, that I had downloaded files outside my authorization. That effective immediately, pending investigation, I was suspended. I stood very still. "What files?" I said. He slid a printed report across the desk. I looked at it. The access timestamps were dated to a Tuesday night 3 weeks prior. I had been in Charleston that Tuesday for a due diligence site visit. I had receipts, a hotel reservation, a rental car agreement, and 4 colleagues who had dinner with me that evening. None of that was mentioned in the report. "I was not in the building that night," I said. Diana uncrossed and recrossed her ankles. "The system logs don't lie, Claire." That was the moment I understood. Not suspected. Understood. Clearly the way you understand something that has always been true, but you were not ready to see. I was 33 days from vesting a significant equity stake in Caldwell Group, equity that my grandfather had put in the founding documents specifically for direct family members. Diana had been trying for 2 years to have that clause removed. She hadn't been able to. But if I was terminated for cause before the vesting date? I picked up the report. I looked at my father. "Dad," I said. I was not in the building. He didn't look at me. He looked at his desk. I left the office. I took the elevator down. I walked out into the afternoon and sat on a bench across the street for 45 minutes without moving. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Mr. Patterson. He was 62, semi-retired, and had spent 20 years as a corporate litigator before deciding he preferred a lighter caseload and better coffee. He listened to everything I said. He asked me to send him the access logs, my travel records, and the original vendor discrepancy report. He called me back the next morning. "Claire," he said, "you have a real problem and a real opportunity. The problem is that someone with administrative access created a convincing paper trail. The opportunity is that convincing isn't the same as airtight." I was terminated 11 days later. Formal letter. Cause cited, the equity forfeited. I moved into a studio apartment in a neighborhood my stepmother would never voluntarily enter. The building had a buzzing intercom and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. I bought a used laptop, a cheap desk, and a French press. I ate a lot of rice and beans. I worked. During the day I consulted small businesses, nonprofits, anyone who needed a sharp financial analyst and couldn't afford a major firm. At night I studied. I passed my CFA level 1 on the first attempt, then level 2, then level 3. I built models. I learned things about capital markets that I had never needed to know inside the comfortable walls of Caldwell Group. I also, very quietly, began building something else. A former professor of mine had started a small private equity vehicle and was looking for a junior partner with operational experience. I came to him with a pitch I had been refining for 4 months. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "When can you start?" I want to be clear. What I built did not happen overnight. It happened over 4 years of early mornings and late nights, and dinners I skipped, and weekends I didn't take. It happened through decisions that felt small at the time, an overlooked asset here, an undervalued stake there, that accumulated into something real. By my 31st birthday, the firm we had built, Meridian Capital Partners, managed just over $200 million in assets. I was no longer the junior partner. I was also, through a series of carefully structured acquisitions, the largest single holder of Caldwell Group debt. My stepmother had done what ambitious people often do when their position feels secure. She expanded too fast. In the 4 years since I'd been gone, Caldwell Group had taken on 3 acquisitions, leveraged significantly, and renegotiated its primary credit facilities twice. The company was not in crisis, but it was exposed. I knew this because I had read every public filing with the kind of attention that only comes from years of intimate familiarity with the business, and because one of our portfolio holdings happened to be a mid-sized lender that held a portion of Caldwell Group's revolving credit. I did not manufacture their problems. I want to be absolutely clear about that. Their problems were their own. I simply positioned myself, very patiently, to be present when those problems became acute. The call came from their CFO on a Wednesday afternoon. He didn't know who he was calling. Meridian Capital had made a quiet offer to purchase a package of distressed credit instruments from 3 different lenders. Caldwell Group's debt was bundled inside. The CFO had reached out to introduce himself and request a conversation about restructuring terms. "Of course," I said. "I'd be happy to schedule a call." He asked to whom he was speaking. "Claire Caldwell," I said, "managing partner." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "Did you say?" "I did," I said. "Wednesday works well. Shall we say 2 o'clock? The civil suit was Diana's move. It was, I have to say, a bold one. She filed it 6 weeks after that phone call, alleging that I had engaged in a scheme to damage Caldwell Group through insider information obtained during my employment. Her attorney was expensive and precise and had a very good reputation. The complaint was 87 pages. My father signed a supporting declaration. I read it twice. I sat with that for a day. The distance from that moment to the 9-year-old version of me who would watch Diana rearrange my mother's furniture. That distance was either very long or very short depending on how I held it. I chose to hold it as fuel. Mr. Patterson came out of semi-retirement. I also brought in 2 additional attorneys from a firm that specialized in securities litigation. I did not tell anyone outside my legal team what I was planning. I went to work. The discovery process took 4 months. I will spare you the procedural details except to say this: the forensic IT specialist we retained was very, very good at her job. She had a particular interest in administrative access logs and the metadata that lives underneath them. She found what I knew was there. The original unauthorized access had been performed using a credential override, a back-end method that leaves a specific kind of residue in the system architecture, the kind that a standard compliance review would miss, but a forensic analysis would not. The credential override was tied to an IP address. The IP address resolved to a device. The device was registered to a network account. The account belonged to a third-party IT contractor who, it emerged, had done significant work for Diana's previous employer before she joined Caldwell Group, and who had, according to his own billing records which we obtained in discovery, been on site at Caldwell Group's headquarters on the Tuesday night in question. Mr. Patterson called me after he reviewed the forensic report. "Claire," he said, "I think we just ended this case." "Not yet," I said. "Not until we're in the room. I want to tell you about the morning of the hearing." I got up at 5. I made coffee. I stood at the window of my apartment and watched the city come awake. The delivery trucks, the early joggers, the lights turning on in the building across the street. I had not slept much. Not because I was afraid, but because there was a particular quality to that morning that I wanted to be present for. 4 years of quiet, unglamorous work had been building toward a specific point, and that point was now a few hours away. I put on the suit I had bought 6 months earlier and set aside for this. It was charcoal, well cut, understated. I put on the watch my professor had given me when I made partner, a simple steel piece, nothing flashy. I picked up my folder. I thought about my grandfather. He had built Caldwell Group from a regional logistics company into a diversified holding operation over 40 years. He had put that equity clause in the founding documents specifically, he told me once, because this family has a habit of forgetting who does the work. He had looked at me when he said it. I was 15. I didn't fully understand it then. I understood it now. I took a car to the courthouse. I arrived early. I sat at the defense table and organized my materials. I watched the gallery fill. I watched Diana arrive with her attorney, unhurried, composed. I watched my father take his seat behind her. When he shook his head at me, I looked back at him for a long moment. Then I turned to face the front of the courtroom. The judge entered. We rose. It began. Diana's attorney opened with a polished and well-organized presentation of their theory, that I had used relationships and knowledge developed during my employment at Caldwell Group to systematically acquire the company's debt instruments for the purpose of extortion and destabilization. He used the word vendetta twice. He used the phrase orchestrated campaign 3 times. He was very good. The gallery was attentive. I could feel the weight of the room against me, the way a room leans when it has already decided. My father had not looked away from me. Then it was my turn. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the front of the courtroom. "Your Honor," I said, "the plaintiff's theory is interesting. It requires, however, that we ignore several things. We'll start with the night of April 14th. I walked through the forensic findings methodically. I did not rush. I presented the access log analysis, the IP trace, the contractor's billing records, the network account registration. I presented my Charleston travel records, the hotel, the rental car, the receipts, the signed dinner check with my 4 colleagues. I presented an affidavit from the hotel's front desk manager confirming my check-in and check-out. I presented a timeline. Diana's attorney objected twice. Both objections were overruled. When I got to the contractor's name, I saw something happen at the plaintiff's table. Diana's lead attorney leaned back slightly. He picked up his pen. He put it down. He leaned toward his co-counsel and said something in a voice too low to hear. His co-counsel looked at the exhibit. Then he looked at Diana. And I watched. I want you to understand that I watched this very carefully, because I had been waiting for it for 4 years. I watched his expression change. The precise, calibrated professionalism he had carried into the courtroom that morning shifted, just for a moment, into something unguarded. He looked at me. "Is that?" He started, and then stopped himself. His co-counsel, less experienced, less controlled, turned around and looked at the gallery. Then he looked at Diana. Then he looked at me. "Is that really her?" he said. Not to me, to his colleague. In a voice that carried, the gallery murmured. My father straightened in his seat. Diana's hand resting on the table went very still. I continued my presentation. The hearing lasted 2 more hours. I will not walk you through all of it. What I will tell you is that by the time we reached the afternoon recess, Diana's lead attorney had requested a brief conference with his client. The conference lasted 20 minutes. When court reconvened, he informed the judge that the plaintiff was prepared to discuss a stipulated dismissal. I stood up. The defense, I said, has a counterproposal. My counterproposal was this: dismissal with prejudice, a full retraction of the false compliance report that had triggered my termination, a written acknowledgement that the termination had been improper, and reinstatement of the vested equity that had been forfeited. I had calculated that equity's current value that morning. I stated the number in court. Diana's attorney looked at the number. He looked at Diana. Diana said something quietly. He turned back to the judge. The plaintiff will need some time to consider the terms, he said. Of course, the judge said. We'll recess until 9 tomorrow morning. My father was waiting in the hallway when I came out. He looked older than he had inside. The courtroom lighting is unflattering to everyone, but the hallway was worse, somehow. Fluorescent and honest. He was 61 years old, and he looked it in a way I hadn't noticed before. I stopped walking. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the floor, then at me, then at the floor again. He had his hands in his pockets. The same posture from the parking lot at my graduation. The same posture from every moment in my life, when he had something to say and was not sure how to say it. I didn't know, he said. About the contractor. I didn't know. I looked at him. I thought about the declaration he had signed. I thought about the morning he had told me I was suspended and hadn't met my eyes. I thought about 9-year-old me watching him choose over and over to believe the woman who rearranged my mother's furniture. I know you didn't, I said. And I meant it not as forgiveness exactly, but as something accurate. He had not orchestrated what Diana had done. He had simply been willing, consistently, to look away. That was its own kind of choice. But it was a different kind than hers. Is the equity, he started. Yes, I said. I'm not interested in destroying the company, Dad. I never was. He nodded slowly. She told me you had always resented her, he said. That this was personal. It became personal, I said. It started as me reporting a vendor billing irregularity through the proper channels. You can check the original compliance submission. I filed it correctly. I did my job. He was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, he said. It came out flat and insufficient, the way genuine things sometimes do when they arrive too late. I picked up my folder. Get some rest, I said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I walked to the elevator. I did not look back. The terms were signed the following afternoon. Diana's attorney negotiated on 3 of the 5 points. He got 2 minor concessions on timeline and language. On the substance, the equity, the retraction, the written acknowledgement, he got nothing. When the document was finalized and signed, he shook my hand with the careful courtesy of someone who has revised their understanding of a situation significantly and recently. Ms. Caldwell, he said. Mr. Hartley, I said. Diana was not in the room when we signed. Her attorney handled it. I drove back to my apartment. I made coffee. I sat at the desk I had bought secondhand 4 years ago when I moved into a studio that flooded in the parking lot and had a buzzing intercom, and I read through the signed document from beginning to end. My grandfather's equity clause. My name, the number. I thought about all the nights no one had seen. The rice and beans. The French press at 2 in the morning. The models I built and rebuilt and built again. The calls I took on weekends. The site visits. The due diligence. The years of meticulous, unglamorous work that had no audience and required none. I had not done any of it for this moment. I want to be honest about that. I had done it because I needed to survive, and then because I was good at it, and then because I found that I genuinely loved the work. The logic of it. The patience it required. The way it rewarded people who were willing to think carefully and wait. The moment in the courtroom. The look on that attorney's face. The 4 words he hadn't been able to stop himself from saying, that had been a consequence. not a goal. But I would be lying if I said it hadn't felt like something. 3 weeks after the settlement, the Caldwell Group board voted to restructure the executive leadership. My stepmother resigned her position as chief operating officer. The resignation was described in the press release as voluntary. I have no way of knowing what conversations preceded it. My father called me on a Sunday morning. He asked if I would be willing to meet for coffee. I said I would think about it. I am still thinking about it. There are some bridges that can be rebuilt, and some that have to be redesigned entirely before anyone should try to cross them, and I am still deciding which kind this one is. What I know is this. I am 31 years old. I run a firm that manages $200 million in assets. I sit on the board of 2 organizations that work with first-generation professionals entering finance. I mentor 4 young women who remind me, in different ways, of the version of me that sat on a bench across the street from a building that had just taken everything and spent 45 minutes figuring out what came next. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. The people who dismiss you are not seeing you. They are seeing what they expect. Your job is not to correct their expectation. Your job is to quietly build something so undeniable that the correction happens on its own, in a courtroom, in a boardroom, in a hallway, wherever the moment finds you. You will be tired. You will eat bad food and work too many hours, and there will be stretches where it seems like the work is going nowhere. Let it go nowhere. Keep working. The work is the point. The rest is just what happens when the work is finished. I picked up my coffee. Outside, the city was loud and ordinary and entirely indifferent to what had happened to me and what I had built from it. That was fine. I'd never needed it to pay attention. I had just needed it to get out of my way.